disrupted by the recent incident. I offer my deepest regrets. The situation was unprecedented, and we recognize the considerable inconvenience and concern that it caused. Heathrow is one of the busiest airports in the world, and it is in our interest, as much as in our passengers' interest, to ensure that the airport remains open and operational at all times. On the day of the incident, our focus was very clear and immediate: to protect the safety of passengers and airport staff, to protect the security of the airport and integrity of our borders, and to minimize disruption and resume operations as soon as at all possible. I'm absolutely committed to ensuring that we learn from this event. Today, I want to set out for Parliament my 5-point comprehensive plan to strengthen our response capabilities and to build upon the systems that we already have in place. First, we have commissioned the Kelly Review and are working closely with the NISA report.
Mr. Bobby, could I ask you to do that set out your 5 points as they are relevant to the questions that we ask, because we've got a series of questions which will include
it's very short,
lines.
Maybe just to make sure what we focus on. Is that okay? Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. I have ordered a further internal review of Heathrow resilience processes. I have met with airline chief executives to agree on future joint response plans. I have strengthened or set out initiatives to strengthen collaboration with our partners, including those to my left. And 5, we will enhance engagement with customers and passenger groups to understand their expectations for the future. And I'll make sure this committee is kept informed as we progress. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll go back to my question. 200,000 to 300,000 passengers were severely impacted by that, whether they were couldn't fly at all or they were already in the air. That's families and friends not met, holidays not taken, meetings not met, or people not being able to get home. So could you start from what happened on that night and the next day?
Yes. I'll try to keep it brief. What happened was that just before midnight, as far as I know, the transformer substation caught fire. It's called North Hyde. It is a substation operated by SSEN and National Grid. I think that may be highlighted or explained later. That is part of the resilient power supply to Heathrow. It consists of 3 transformers and has 2 independent lines running into Heathrow. That caught fire. That is a very low risk event, a very low probability event that we have such a station going out. It has 3 very large transformers that all were out of function, and both of the 2 supposedly resilient lines that goes into Heathrow and power parts of Heathrow also went out of function. The Heathrow power network is set up so that we have 3 substations. They all, or 3 inlets, if you like, the substations are not ours, 3 inlets of power. They each power different parts of the airport. We realized during the early hours, so that is around 12:30, 1 o'clock, that we were losing power to the airport. And in our operations center, you would have seen all the red lights go, that systems were powering down. We had no information as to why. We then, at a slightly later stage, got a call from the fire department that the substation was on fire. Our fire corps also went out to help put out the fire. We were in a very uncertain situation for many hours until 6 o'clock in the morning, because we could not get information on how long this would last. But we could see that 1/3 of the airport was out of, or at least was powering down. This is first and foremost a safety situation. We need to make sure when a crisis happens that people are safe, and that is the first priority that we also set out to secure, i.e. that no one is caught in lifts or elevators, that no one has gotten hurt, that no one has been electrocuted, that our systems are working. What we could see was that our systems were not working, particularly in the area of Terminal 2 and the tunnel into our central terminal area were affected. That area also housed airport-wide systems, which were also powering down as we were losing power. Our safety resilient systems, so the systems that power our safety critical operations, like the runway lights, the tower, they all switch in as they should in the airport. But for all other functions, so the operationally critically systems, for that we rely on power from partners with whom we have resilient contracts or contracts for resilient power setups. What we then decided, when we had asserted the situation and started setting up our objectives for how we would solve this crisis, which is standard operating procedure that we do that, we set up the first objective to be back in operation by Saturday morning, normal opening at 04:30 in the morning. The second objective was to be back in operation before that. Now, this is, of course, after we have secured the safety of staff at the airport, secured the safety of environment, and secured the safety of our assets and our borders. So after that, what are we setting out to solve? And that was to be back in operation by 0400 next morning, considering the severity of the incident, and considering, I think it's very important, the uncertainty that we were in for a very long time. We did not know exactly what was happening. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the fire was still blazing. The fire service had not started extinguishing the fire, I believe, but I hope we can get more information on that. So we simply didn't know when we would get that third inlet up and running again. There was no information on that. What we did know was that in order to power the airport on 2 substations, which we had left, we would have to restructure the, so to speak, the wiring, i.e. how we route the electricity and power inside the airport. And that takes a number of hours, and it takes that you shut down the systems, you rewire the power network, and you then open up systems. That sounds like a simple process. That is a very complicated process that you need to execute in a certain sequence in order not to damage the systems and create more damage than you already had at the outset. That procedure we set out to do because, as we could see, if we were to fulfill our objective of opening fully 0400 the next 04:30 the next day, we could not depend on the third inlet that we had. So that's why we took the decision we took. We went about doing that. That takes about 10 hours to do. As I said, it's a very complicated process, and you must get it right. We can come back to some of the details of that, but eventually that was a successful process, and we managed to open fully 0400 the next day. We also managed, in coordination, particularly with British Airways, to open Terminal 5 that was less affected by the outage earlier than that. That opened 4 o'clock on Saturday. No, sorry, 4 o'clock on Friday already, and we had a limited number of flights arriving and departing at that time. I think maybe to address that point, why did we close the airport? When we cannot safely operate the airport, and when we cannot guarantee and have full visibility and transparency on the fact that we can operate the airport safely, then we cannot operate the airport. I think the only thing we could have done worse than that would have been to let passengers travel from an unsafe airport. That is not an option, and we cannot compromise on that. That's quite clear in our license with the Central Civil Aviation Authority. So it became quite clear that we could not operate the airport safely quite early in this process, and that is why we closed the airport. If we had not done that, we would have had thousands of passengers stranded at the airport, high risk to personal injury, gridlocked roads around the airport, because don't forget, 65,000 houses, other institutions were powered down. Traffic lights didn't work, just to give you an example. Many things didn't work. Parts of the civil infrastructure didn't work. So the risk of having literally tens of thousands of people stranded at the airport where we would have nowhere to put them, we could not process them, would have been a disastrous scenario which we could not look into, and which, by the way, was also agreed by the airlines on the day. I think maybe I'll leave it there. There are many more details, but I think this is sort of short summary of how we look at it.
Thank you. I'll go to Nigel now.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, from our perspective, this actually went back a few days because I'd actually warned Heathrow of concerns that we had with regard to the substations. And my concern was resilience. So the first occasion was to Team Heathrow Director on the 15th of the month of March. And then I also spoke to their Chief Operating Officer and Chief Customer Officer 2 days before regarding this concern. And it was following a couple of incidents of, unfortunately, theft of wire and cable around some of the power supply that on one of those occasions took out the lights on the runway for a period of time. That obviously made me concerned. And as such, I'd raised the point that I wanted to understand better the overall resilience of the airport. Clearly, Heathrow is a very significant hub operation. It has over 80 airlines operating through the airport. It is the hub for the UK, and it's the major hub for Europe, we contest. And as such, we need to make sure that it is resilient. I mean, it is the most expensive airport in the world with regard to passenger charges. So from our perspective, that means we should actually have the best service, we should have the best infrastructure. Regarding the day of operation, clearly from our members, we had to divert or send back to base 120 aircraft with passengers on board. That is not a light decision to be made in any context. And the consequence of that was when I joined the 5:30 call with NATS, they'd run out of space within the UK for aircraft to divert in the UK. Aircraft were then going to Europe, and then some were even halfway across Europe and we're going back to base in India. So, you know, quite a level of disruption for those passengers, let alone all of the cancellations. There were 1,300 cancellations on the day, nearly 300,000 passengers disrupted by this. Consequence of that was airlines having to fulfill a duty of care. And as AOC, we are responsible on behalf of the CAA to send letters out to our members, make them aware of their duty of care, i.e. that they provide food, beverage, hotels where required, reflighting, refunds as appropriate, and make sure that the passenger can hopefully continue their journey either that day or beyond. Some of those that were landed in Europe, there were challenges with visas, lots of complications that weren't planned, obviously. And then a number of those aircraft and their passengers, or the passengers, were bussed back into the UK at the expense of the airline. So from an impact perspective, very significant. In terms of then running through the day, the biggest challenge was information. Because airlines, this is a global event. When you take out a hub like this, you've basically got ops controls, which are the basically managing the network for the airlines around the world, trying to figure out, right, what are we doing with our aircraft? What are we doing with our crews? But most importantly, what can we do for our customers and how will we serve them to recover their journey and manage the communications of that? So all the airlines take on that responsibility through their ops controls. To do that, they need information. They need information from Heathrow. Heathrow is very good at having community calls, and one of them in the afternoon that I was involved in actually maxed out on Teams with 1,000 participants. Another one had over 800. That was the level of clamoring for information. We'd asked Heathrow to put out emails with a schedule of detail as to decisions made, impact, when further decisions would be made. I think we got one at 1,700, and we as AOC basically put one out after every one of the community calls, just to make sure information was getting out there. Heathrow does have a community app, you know, one on your phone that it's almost a scroll down of updates. But for global communication, that's not good enough. So you need to actually have more structure in the information. During the day, I planted myself into Compass Centre, Heathrow's ops control kind of area, and tried to convey to Heathrow the urgency of getting decisions made, information out. British Airways had let me know that T5 for them was operating and available to operate in the morning. They checked in with NATS that the runway was okay, NATS could operate effectively. So they really did want to be able to, one, receive repatriation flights. So some of those flights that were stuck in Europe with visa problems and various other things, how to get those back in. Now those did come, some of those came back in late in the day, but T5 could have been ready to receive those late morning, is our conjecture. In addition to that, there was opportunity also to get flights out of T5, an opportunity for that. And we could have actually made further arrangements in terms of moving passengers, is my feeling. I think overall, all the teams on the day put best efforts in to actually achieve a good outcome. And on the day after the Saturday, we pretty much recovered all of those passengers. Heathrow ran 89% of its schedule. We had 50 extra flights coming in. Airlines were upgauging the aircraft, increasing the size of the aircraft, just to minimize the impact on the passengers. And the view is that by Sunday, we'd cleared the backlog of passengers.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of supplementaries that I think people want to ask, but I do want to let Alice and Eliane answer the introductory question. So, Alice.
Thank you. And again, you know, this is a very rare and significant event, and we are very sorry for the disruption that was caused, very significant level of disruption. I thought it might be helpful if I just briefly set out the different roles. There's an analogy that often gets used with the roadways. So you can think about the transmission network, which I run, as the motorways doing bulk power transfer, and the distribution network, SSEN in this case, as the A roads and the residential roads that go right to homes and businesses and provide power. And then, of course, within homes and businesses, you have their own wiring, switches, equipment, and obviously that's much more complex and significant for a complex like Heathrow, and that gets called a private network. So we're talking about three different networks here, and that's the relationship between them. So in terms of the events of Thursday night and Friday, as has been mentioned, fire broke out at North Hyde substation on one of the transformers. That was immediately visible within our control room. The standby transformer on that site did switch in exactly as expected immediately afterwards, but the sudden and extreme heat of the fire meant then that all three transformers on site tripped out of service. The fire brigade was mobilised. Our incident response was mobilised immediately, and the standby engineer was sent to site. So on the night then in question, the first incident response meeting happened shortly after midnight. That was run by my director of network operations. Following the sit rep that they did, where they established the situation and the severity of it, had feedback from the standby engineer and the fire services. They alerted me of the situation. So I became involved at that stage. I did the second incident response meeting early hours of the morning, and then travelled immediately to site. Throughout the night, we were engaged with the fire services, working very, very closely with SSEN and with the London Resilience Forum, which was bringing all parties together to coordinate. Our focus was very much on ensuring the safety of the fire services and our team on site, making the equipment safe and dead to enable the fighting of the fire. I arrived on site early morning. It was very stark to see the situation on site, the extreme nature of it, and how professionally and diligently the teams were working to ensure safety and to fight that fire. And the absolute focus was on restoring customers in the wider community, which I know Eliane will talk about how that was achieved, and on returning supplies to North Hyde substation itself. We had confirmed the rest of the network was secure and operating as expected. In cooperation with SSEN, we returned one route to North Hyde about 10 a.m. And then worked through the day to secure a second route to North Hyde that evening. So very, very focused response on safety and the speed of returning. And of course, throughout that, there was a lot of working with the local community for whom there was a huge amount of disruption as well. So, you know, again, just to say this is a very rare event. It is a very serious event, and we really welcome the investigation and the opportunities for us to learn across what is a multi-party event with many interfaces and many considerations for resilience. Okay. Thank you.
Leanne.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to thank the committee for the invite to present and to give evidence and explain the step we took as a local distribution network operator to restore supply to all our 67,000 customers, including the North Heathrow intake, as what was a very unusual incident. As Alice mentioned, the National Grid substation at North Hyde has 3 supergrid transformers. On the night, 2 of these supergrid transformers were operational. Because of the incident and the fire, by 23:51, we had lost access of supply from the 3 supergrid transformers. I was called at 23:57, and at that point, we initiated our recovery program, which is very well rehearsed. It's very similar to what we do in storm or exceptional event. So the first steps we took are first to assess potential options in terms of what we can do to restore supply. And the way we do it is we restore supply by switching our customer on the network, which means we reroute our network both through remote switching from our control room, and for the lower voltage, then we dispatch workforce on the ground to switch manually. So that's what we did. We also sent a team to National Grid, and we had a member of staff, an experienced member of staff on site within 30 minutes of the incident being declared, which is very useful in order to really give us an understanding of the size of the incident and developed optioneering. So at that point, within the next few hours, as I say, we worked very hard to restore our customer. Within the first hour, we had restored about 62%, 64%, 83% within 2 hours, 91% within 3 hours. And by 4 a.m., we had restored 62,000 customers. The remaining 4,900 customers, as well as the North Heathrow intake, was requiring for us to gain access to the site in order to switch what we call the 66 kV interconnector, who links North Hyde grid supply point to another supply point. So we work with the fire brigade. The fire was very fierce. We gained access to the side of the 6 kV compound at 6 a.m. And we were able at that point to assess that our interconnector were not damaged, and that there was no carbon from the smoke on the asset, which means that once it was safe to energize, we could do it. We worked with the fire brigade, who was very accommodating. As Ali said, it was about making sure it was safe on site for the fire brigade, that it was safe to energize. We were given permission to energize at 9:30 a.m. And at 10 a.m., we were able to start, actually 9:49, we were able to start energization of the remaining 4,900 customers, including Heathrow North intake. We spoke with Heathrow at 10 a.m. and offered them that connection. And then we worked through the day with Alice and her team to make sure that we could also reconnect one of the supergrid transformer, and that was done at 2:22 a.m. on Saturday morning. All our customers were restored by 22 27 on Friday.
Okay, thank you. I'll let Kath, I'll say you, sorry. Catherine, do you want to come in, and then that may elicit some other questions from colleagues?
Thank you. Yes, I was hoping just to ask Mr. Volby, would closure under these circumstances always have been part of the plan?
In the circumstances where we cannot secure the 100% safe operation of the airport, yes.
And more specifically, in circumstances where you'd lost this degree of power. I know that you kind of leapt ahead to the assessment on safety, and I understand that. But with this much power, do you think that it was always going to be the case that you would have had to close?
Yes, we have 3 inlets. As I said, they each power a part of the airport. So it's not that we have 3 inlets that then power the entire airport. We have 3 inlets, and they each power a discrete part of the airport. They have the capacity of 32 megawatts, 42 megawatts, and 70 megawatts. The one we lost was the one at 70 megawatts, so by far the biggest. That powers primarily Terminal 2, 400 buildings, and our parts of Terminal 4, and our the CTA tunnel that you go through to get into Terminal 2 and 3. So critical parts of the infrastructure. Part of that is also buildings that house systems that are airport-wide, like CCTV, some of the fueling safety systems, and safety locking systems for doors. So security systems are there, and they were at least momentarily lost. So they are airport-wide systems, and when we cannot guarantee that all systems at the airport are working the way they should, there is no other way. We cannot guarantee the safety of passengers when we cannot process them. So no security scanners, no baggage systems, and so forth. Right. So there's no way we can operate the airport safely.
We heard from Mr. Wicking some queries around Terminal 5. Do you feel that really that some of the terminals might have been able to be opened safely, or at least be able to be reopened sooner?
I think that is one of the reasons we have instituted the Kelly review, is to establish exactly that. It's worth knowing that the fact that the lights were on at Terminal 5, which is entirely correct, doesn't mean the terminal was operational. We didn't have all CCTV, we didn't have fire surveillance. The fire systems would work, so if you pull the fire alarm, water would come down, but the fire surveillance systems of the airport was down, so we didn't know whether the systems were up and safe. All that had to be secured before we started operation. We had very close cooperation. I spoke several times with Sean Doyle, who's the CEO of BA, on that. We also had some of the fueling safety shutoffs that were not working. We had to ensure they were working. This all happened around 10 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. So all of that had to be ensured. I cannot guarantee you whether T5 could have opened an hour earlier. We did all we could to get it open as soon as we could, because we fully understand the airline's concerns around getting repatriated flights, repatriate passengers, and also get flights in there. Initially, we were of the opinion we could not get passenger flights out, but Sean Doyle and myself were instrumental in actually getting some critical BA flights with passengers out on the same evening.
I understand that hindsight is a wonderful thing, but with the knowledge that you have now, in the hindsight that you now have, are there things you would have done differently?
Again, I will not preempt the Kelly review, and it's not that I don't want to answer your question. I just think this is really, our industry is a very fact-based industry. We should not speculate on things. When I look at how the command and control system of the airport worked, that worked exactly the way it's set up. So the right people were in the right place to take the right decisions at the right time. I am convinced that with the uncertainty that we were facing for the long period of time that was also described here, the fire was still blazing 6 o'clock in the morning. We could not take any other decision. And I am satisfied that the decision we took to power up based on our 2 substations was the right decision. And that then implies that we would have to shut down the airport in order to power down, rewire, and power up the systems.
Okay.
And that requires closing the airport. So the answer to your question is yes.
Given that the control tower and the runway light, given that the control tower and the runway lights and some terminal functionality was still operational, was it impossible to allow those planes that were already en route to be able to land, even if the passengers may have had to go to different terminals?
That is, of course, a good question. Now, we would be able to land aircraft, but we would then be leaving aircraft on the runways with passengers in them, not being able to process them because we didn't have the safety. That is not an acceptable situation.
You didn't have the safety in any of the terminals?
No, not we didn't have the processing capacity we needed. So sending, and when we go out and close the airport, then the airport is closed. And that was a decision taken considerably earlier. So no.
And do the airlines, what's the airline's view of that?
I think from an airline perspective, initial decision being made, there is a level of understanding that a decision had to be made. But there should have been constant review of that decision, particularly as we realised fairly early on T5 and the runway were available. And those flights could have been brought in. Even if we had to manually operate those flights and receive them appropriately that way, that could have been done. And certainly in terms of resource, we had checks in with Border Force during the day, and they had full resource capability and availability to handle operations coming in.
Was a conversation had between Heathrow and the airlines on that very point, or was it too late by then?
So we were raising the point of allowing aircraft to come in early. In terms of the 120, that was too late. Decisions had to be made in terms of redirecting and repositioning those aircraft. In terms of then taking some of those that had been diverted and bringing those back as repatriation flights quickly, we were constantly kind of pushing for that for that to take place as soon as possible. And clearly that eventually happened later in the day. But by then, most of the airlines have made decisions with regard to busing, hoteling the passengers, etc. So it's kind of almost too late to then make the operational decision to bring them back in later in the day.
So, you want to come in?
Thank you. Just want to rebound back to the introductory comments, if you don't mind. So Alice and Thomas, both of you stressed that this was a really low probability event. But when I think back to my university days, it's low probability, really high consequence, though, really high consequence. So, but was it on your risk register? Was this something you'd planned for?
From a national grid perspective, we have full fire risk registers. We understand the risk of transformer fire, which is very, very low.
High consequence in this situation.
High consequence. And I think one of the reasons we talk about this being such an unusual and rare event is this is the first time a fire on a transformer that we're aware of has had knock-on consequences on the entire substation. In terms of...
is that because of the design of that substation, or you don't know that yet?
That is certainly questions that need to be understood through the investigation.
For you, Thomas, was this on your risk register?
Yes, we have risk registers that include both total loss of power to the airport and partial loss of power to the airport.
Yeah, it seems such a difficult situation for you to deal with, although it was on your risk register.
It is a difficult situation to deal with. It is what's described a very unlikely decision, unlikely event.
High consequence.
Very high consequence. And that's also why we had a plan for what to do when it happened. And that is exactly what we did, which was switch over to the two we had left. That takes hours and that closes the airport. But there is a long discussion, and I'm sure that will also come out with Kelly. And I think particularly the NISO survey, I'm looking forward to that, is we acquire, purchase and pay for a resilient setup from our suppliers. Are we then also supposed to have a setup next to that? Then we would have to have a whole power station at the cost of billions for the airlines at our place. So,
but your suppliers are just contractors. Ultimately, you're responsible for running off the airport. It's up to you to make sure the contracts you have with your suppliers are correct. You can't just say, "Well, we're passing this on to our suppliers."
I fully agree with that. Yeah. I fully agree with that. And those are also the contracts we have in place. We have our contracts with SSCN are for the three individual inlets. They are for resilient power setups, which include parallel supply lines, which include 3 very, very big, as I understand it, transformers at the end of it. That what happens should not happen, as also just described. But we have to rely on the contracts we have. And I think the NISO survey, and I think that's a discussion for later, should say, should we have further resilience? But that, of course, comes at a very high cost. And that is the discussion we have to have with airlines, because we cannot make investments without having airlines. So I'm not trying to pass any box here. I'm just making clear what are the responsibilities we each have. And yes, we had a scenario for that, and that was the one we played out. Having all three transformers going down and the inlets going down at the same time gives us the consequences that we saw.
Doesn't sound like resilience, though, doesn't it?
Yes, and that is clearly my concern. This is already the most expensive airport in the world. From an airline perspective, we expect resilience. We expect there to be the capability there and the understanding of when a power supply or an asset is not available, what will you do next and how quickly will you bring it back? Thomas shared with me yesterday that they'd done a 2018 review of resilience and capability. And I said, well, was that shared with the airline community for us to understand the level of resilience you have? And he said, no, that's not for sharing on the phone. And I said, well, I think it is for sharing now, because frankly, we pay enough. And I saw the remarks in the FT. We already pay enough for Heathrow. I don't feel that we should be paying more for further resilience. The resilience should have been there in the first place, frankly.
I think we're going to come back to resilience shortly, but Bill, do you want to? Well, looking at the power supply. At
I will do. I mean, as Scott Arthur's just mentioned, the risk register, a related point. I mean, I just checked something you said there, Thomas Volk. Did you say that all 3 substations were down at the same time? Then?
No.
Okay. I'm glad we cleared up.
One substation.
No, I thought I heard you say it, and that wasn't. I'm glad you.
Transformers.
I thought I would give you the chance to clear that up. Your 2024 annual report doesn't refer to electrical infrastructure or substations. Was it a mistake not to include it in the report?
I think that is a relevant question. I think there are many things we conclude our report. We have many systems. We have a few systems. We have other systems that are not mentioned. There would not be a particular reason to mention that in our report.
Well, we're talking about this very, very serious incident, aren't we? That's the one that we need to focus on today. So you accept that was a mistake. Okay, thank you. The airport was down for a lot longer than railways or domestic customers. Is it reasonable for airlines and passengers to expect that as far as a single electrical substation would not be sufficient to cause a full closure of the airport? That's probably a question for each of you, but Thomas Volberg, perhaps you could have the first go at it.
The way our resilience works is that for our safety critical systems, that would be our tower, runway lights, our control center, we have immediate backup that is based on uninterrupted power supply with batteries and transformers to make sure that in an emergency we can take, for example, take down an aircraft. These are regulated areas where we have to have our own backup. When we come to the remaining part of the airport, so the passenger operation part of the airport, we rely on resilience provided by our suppliers. As we do for fuel supply, we don't have our own fuel production. We have a fuel supply that can be interrupted, as we have a water supply that can also be interrupted. For the power supply, we have and have contracted specifically a resilience setup. We pay £135 million a year for energy and the resilience setup we have with our suppliers, which includes, as I said, backup transformers, parallel lines into the airport from 3 different substations. So all of that is supposed to be resilient. And as we also heard, this is unprecedented and this should not happen. And there is a question about where should the resilience lie? How far back up the supply chain do we need to go to provide resilience over and beyond what is already in regulation and what has been agreed with airlines? And as far as I'm concerned, it's not about paying more for the airlines, but there's a discussion with airlines, because as regulation works, we cannot make additional investments without consulting and get approval from airlines.
I think we've got a message. Nigel Wicking, what's your view on whether this was reasonable?
So my view is twofold. One, I think there's a resilience of supply into the airport, and clearly we need to have assurance that there is a sufficient power should one of those supplies go down. And recognizing this was a fire, there could have been any number of events that could have caused one of the substations to go down. That obviously also is on the security register, etc. My other concern also, though, is within the airport and the resilience and the contingencies for transferring that supply. Should one transformer go down, how quickly can you reroute the power? Which I believe is kind of Heathrow's responsibility, possibly with SSEN, but that was what took time. It was that rerouting that was the concern, and the decision to do that at 6 o'clock in the morning, I felt was too late relative to recognizing the power suppliers were making decisions literally within half an hour of the event, recognizing the impact. Why were we not doing that?
Thank you. Aliani Algard, should it have been possible for the system to have been back up and running to give Heathrow full power much more quickly?
So, as has been mentioned by Thomas, there was 2 additional intake fully available throughout the incident, and these 2 connections have the ability to supply power to Heathrow Airport historical peak loads. And actually, at the moment, Heathrow, who is currently operating for the last 10 days, is operating from these 2 intake. At the moment, they have elected not to pull energy from Northside.
Okay, so Alice Delahunty, why do you think Heathrow wasn't able to be up and running more quickly? You've already said in writing and in the media that the 2 other substations were available after the fire, and that Heathrow had access to power throughout the incident. Why didn't it take advantage of the availability of the power?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as has been explained, network resilience does rely on the ability to re-switch and reconfigure to take supplies from different places. So when we talk about 3 parallel inlets being there and 2 were available, I think it is a question for Heathrow as to how they access the remaining 2 inlets that were available throughout.
Thomas Felber, your answer to those 2 questions from SSEN and from National Grid.
Well, as it is for SSEN, we need to rewire, as Secretary Roosevelt said. We need to do that inside the airport as well. That is a much more complicated process, because we have to power down maybe 1,000 systems before we do that switch, and then we have to switch it back on and power up 1,000 systems. We have looked at that because we have not received resilient power on the 3rd power substation yet. We got a letter yesterday from SSEN that would now be the case, that power is resilient. There's power, but first of all, there's nowhere near to the 70 megawatts we have contracted, and it's not resilient, i.e. there's still switching work going on, which we might see ourselves in a similar situation if we had used that substation up to now. Now, that has now been confirmed, so of course we'll now look at that. But even in the planned scenario, it'll take hours to make that switch over. So we did take advantage of the 2 remaining substations as fast as we possibly could. But we needed, of course, a little bit of certainty on where is the situation going. Can we get power back faster or not? When it was clear that we could not get that assurance, we took that decision as early as we could. Airlines have been kept informed all along on our deliberations, why we took those decisions, and what our objectives were in terms of getting operation back as fast as possible. So that is what we did.
Yeah, and how long would it take to switch back to North Hyde if the 2 other sources you're relying on at the moment were to fail for some reason? That's the situation we're in today.
That's what we're working on. We're working on securing that the 2 remaining substations are secure, and that we are working with our partners here to increase capacity and make sure that they are resilient. Switching back would put us in basically similar situation. The infrastructure of the airport has not changed. The airport is built over many, many years. Don't forget, it's built over 70 years. Terminals have been added, power have been added, and that is why we have the structure we have. That is not unlike many European airports. There's not much difference. If we were to switch back, that will take a number of hours. And that is what we are planning for doing further down the road, which will be happening overnight.
Yeah, you have a private network operated by UK private networks. Is that part of the problem here?
It was not part of the problem on the night in the sense that it worked and it played out based on the plan that we have.
Is it part of the problem in how long it took to reestablish?
I think that we absolutely need the Kelly report and the NISO report to say, can we do these things faster? Are there areas of resilience that we can build in, learning from this experience that we can build in that either will shorten that time or limit the impact of a major failure like the one we saw?
Yeah, Aliani Algard, what's your view on the arrangements? My understanding is you don't have visibility of what goes on
Heathrow as a private network.
Yeah.
We have no visibility of the configuration of the network within the Heathrow parameter. What I can say is that we offered at 10 a.m. on Friday access. We were able to re-energize and offer the capacity that Heathrow has pulled at that location for the last 3 years. So there's maximum peak of 22 MVA. And we reconfirmed yesterday, to be clear, that if Heathrow wanted to pull 72 MVA at that connection point, they could.
Yeah, I think that there's no change here. Exactly as said, it was confirmed yesterday that we can get the capacity that we need to run a resilient operation. That was confirmed yesterday and not before that. So that's hence the reason we took the decisions we took. And I think those were the right ones because it enabled us to meet our objective with the airlines of operating the airport 100% by 0:40 on Saturday morning. Had we not done that, that would have been at risk.
Okay, the Energy Security and Net Zero Select Committee's heard significant evidence that businesses use private networks because you can connect more easily, it's quicker to operate, and it's significantly cheaper. Is that really why you have a private network?
I am not an engineer. We are not here to save money. We're here to run an resilient operation. I'd like to come back to the committee on that question. It's beyond my technical knowledge.
Sure. And Alice Delahunty, we're hearing that concern, and this reason for private networks being used by significant energy users. Is it a concern for you?
I mean, I think as I described, there is various different networks involved here. Private networks are not unusual. I think it gives businesses flexibility, and it is for them to understand if those private networks are meeting their needs and requirements.
Okay, Chair, all the other questions later, I think.
There are some other questions, but that might come up in answers to subsequent questions. So I'll go to Alex.
Thank you, Chair. So I think we now understand that backup generators were working as expected, that by the morning there was access to power. But you keep telling us it takes 10 hours to rewire everything. Does that sound resilient, the 10-hour period?
I think under a event like this one, which is as unlikely as has been described, that is the resilience that is in place. That is the playbook that is in place. I think the NISO report on the Kelly will review that and say, should we have more resilience? But that will come at a cost. It is so that we have the regulatorily required resilience in place for our safety systems. Beyond that, we rely on partners, as we do for many other things in the airport. We have to remember that there's not endless, seamless switchover for everything in the airport, and also not in an unprecedented event like this one, which should not happen. And we are still at a stage where we don't know why it happened.
And to anybody, what would the cost of full power, or would the cost of full power resilience be worth it? Should we start at that end?
So I can't comment on, because it's a private network and I don't have visibility of Heathrow configuration, I can't comment on what would be necessary to be able to do that. What I know is that Network Rail, who had the connection in feed to North Side, was able to transfer automatically their power from North Side to Didcot, 400 kV. And we also have data centers who were able to automatically engage their battery power supply in order to retain power throughout the fault.
Thank you. I mean, also, not for me really to comment on whether it's worth it for Heathrow, but what I would say is, and they're not connected directly to the transmission network, but we do build our network to what are called the security supply standards, security of supply and quality standards. Those set out the level of resilience in the network. There are options for customers to go over and above that, and those costs would be considered in the round in terms of benefits to consumers more broadly and to the customer.
If we were to refit sort of a ring round Heathrow that would give you that full resilience, the best estimates of our engineers is that it would exceed £1 billion to refit today.
I think from my members' perspective, clearly the resilience should have been there in the first place. And I'm not hearing that there was a lack of power to come into Heathrow. I was hearing that it took time to move that power to where it needed to be within Heathrow, and 10 hours for me were too long. And actually the time it took to make the decision to go into the 10-hour process seemed too long. And if I'd understood that ahead of time, if the airlines had understood that ahead of time as a risk of this kind of situation, and yet the fire was unusual, but I do think the risk was there, then we might have really challenged Heathrow to find other ways of ensuring that they could return to
Can I just come in
quicker.
on this point, Alex? You say it would cost $1 billion to build up adequate resilience, but you're spending billions on new terminal, on remodeling the terminals, and you know, including Terminal 5, which isn't that old. What has the Heathrow board at any time in the last, I don't know, 10 to 15 years been presented with a proposal to increase the power resilience at the airport and declined to do so?
I do not believe so, but I'd like to confirm that to the committee. I don't believe so, no. The airport is built like many other airports in the way it is over many, many years. More resilience have been built into the system over time. The connection to Terminal 5, for example, have four separate cables going in. So the thought has been on that. Also in connection with a possible runway at Heathrow, has it been thought about, could we increase resilience as part of that process? And of course, that we will continue to do. But I think it's important to note that it's easy to ask for resilience. The cost of full resilience Heathrow for all operational systems would be very, very high. And I don't think it's something airlines could expect to be there. It's never been asked for, and it's been very clear what our service levels were.
Okay. Is that on this point? Because then I want to go back to Alex.
Go back to Alex. I'll come in later.
Okay, Alex, do you want to ask your first question?
I want to go back to the fact that inbound flights were not being allowed to land. So we're being told that the safety critical systems worked. Can you just explain what the safety critical systems are? Because you're also saying that it wasn't safe, in effect, to get passengers to come in because it wasn't possible to process them. So what is a safety critical system, and what is just something that you deem unsafe?
There are two levels of safety here, if we start there. There's the level of the aerodrome safety level, so that is, can aircraft operate safely at our aerodrome? And there is the concerns around passenger safety and health and safety concerns that we have to take care of both of them and consider both when we would do. Essential safety systems are things like airfield lighting, the control tower, telephone exchange, the fire station, our control center, fire pressurized main systems, other fire systems, general fuel farm, and so on. These are the essential systems that means that we can actually take down an aircraft and land it.
Okay, so you've landed it.
Then
so
we
what's the
have
problem
all.
now. What's
Then we
the
have
safety problem.
Then we have
about getting the passengers
all the
off?
operational systems
Yeah.
that are required to handle, and that would be border force, for example. That would be baggage systems. That would be maybe more importantly in this case, air bridges to actually get people out of aircraft. So all the things that you see in the airport every day, lighting in some cases, emergency lighting was on in Terminal 2. So there are many critical systems. Then comes CCTV, fire surveillance, which I mentioned those because they were specifically not working for a period of time. Also access systems. So the locking of doors, we need to make sure the airport is secure and the border is secure, that people cannot pass. All of those were affected also in Terminal 5. And we needed to ensure that they were in place and up and running before we opened the terminal. As I said, I think it's definitely a question for the Kelly review to ensure that this question is answered in the light of hindsight, because don't forget, our objective number one was for the entire airport to be operational at 0400 the next morning. And the second objective was to make sure that we opened as fast as possible beyond that. And those were both the two objectives. And all focus was on that together with the airlines.
Nigel seemed to suggest earlier that some of these things could have been done manually. Would you like to respond to that point?
Manually, I don't understand that. Oh, you can say that we should have done things.
Or steps instead of
Yeah.
bridges.
I
move people around the airport border force.
I think this is one of the reasons we set up the Kelly review, to make sure that we can insert that on the day. It was clearly our evaluation that we did that as fast as we could, with due regard to the safety of our passengers. Could that have done a little bit faster? We will have to look at that, but we are talking, minutes, as in maybe an hour or two. We're not talking longer than that, because I know that systems were out of function. We had a meeting at 10 o'clock where fuel lines were still a question, and we cannot operate without automatic fire switch off on our fuel lines.
Nigel, I think you wanted to come.
Yeah, in terms of T5, my understanding, both from British Airways but also from being there all day, was that pretty much everything was fine to operate by mid-morning, by 10 o'clock. In terms of the fuel point that's been raised, actually the fueling company actually said that was fine. They could still be operated, even though there wasn't an electronic automatic cut-off. They could do it from the fuel backup process that they had. So that wasn't seen as an issue at all. So I don't think there was any reason for T5 not to be used earlier, i.e. from within the morning period, to receive aircraft and redirections.
Just a quick, I think for Nigel, we've heard a lot about hindsight and speed of which decisions were taken, and the question why decisions weren't taken quicker. But if passenger safety and employee safety was compromised, could we be sat here saying why were decisions taken too quickly?
No, that would possibly be the case if I hadn't been there and actually talking to people on the ground from the control centre in T5 and understanding what the situation in T5 was. And the reality was that T5 felt that they were absolutely ready to go and receive it.
So you think passenger safety?
That wouldn't have been an issue with regard to T5 from my perspective.
And when you say passenger safety, what exactly do you mean?
In our case, that is the process of safely getting passengers out of aircraft, getting them through customs. As when we talk arrivals.
I accept that it's
potentially
more risky to have steps than a bridge.
Exactly, for example.
We use steps all the time to get.
We also not had CCTV, and we didn't have fire surveillance. And I think this is a question for the Kelly report. Hindsight is very easy. Don't forget, we have to ensure that all systems are not just seen to be working, but are actually tested and working. And I know that the lights were on a T5 and it looked as if it worked, but there were systems not working. And we have to make sure that these systems are working. This decision are taken by our incident commander, who is trained for this and whose responsibility it is on a personal level to make sure that that works. It is not about saying, well, it looks as if work, we like to operate. These are serious concerns, and we need to make sure they work. And we are, as we talked about at 10 o'clock, at the meeting at 10 o'clock, it was reported that fuel valves were not working. Now, we are then talking that we declared it open at 2 o'clock. So we're talking hours here. This is an evaluation. As you say, if we have gotten this wrong, we might be sitting here today having a very different discussion about why people got injured. I think it would have been a much more serious discussion. So there is a margin within which our people have to take very serious safety decisions. And that is what they are trained for, and that is what they do, and that require that every single system is up and running, tested, and safe.
Okay. Elsie, you've been waiting, so your turn.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to the panel so far. This has been really interesting. For context, my constituency is nowhere near Heathrow. It's Hayward and Middleton, so Manchester Airport is of particular interest to my constituents and to the Greater Manchester region as a whole. So this incident made me think about what the consequences might be for my constituents and passengers across the northwest of England were a similar event to occur there. It would be really good to understand what you think we can learn from this incident if we're to avoid another mass power interruption, and also what the consequences might be elsewhere in the country. Could this have happened at other similar airports? Keen to hear from each of you if you've got a view on this. Nigel, perhaps you might want to start.
Yes, thank you. From my perspective, I think the most important thing is actually having transparency of the risk register, and is this understood to be a risk? And from there, what is the resilience and the business continuity and contingency plans to address such an issue occurring in terms of power supply to an airport?
Thank you. Thomas?
Yes, I think we should definitely use this opportunity. We have made a short review of airports in UK. They all have the similar setup as we have, hence similar risks. I think we need to use the outcome from the Kelly report and these reports to say, how can we improve that? We'll be happy to share those learnings, of course, with other airports to ensure that we overall have the most resilient aviation system that we can have. Absolutely.
Thank you. Alice, Eliane, I don't know if you have a view on this.
I mean, it seems, excuse me, it seems very clear that there is a higher degree of cooperation and visibility needed through the various parties. We do, as a matter of course, if we need to do maintenance and we know that's putting an airport at an elevated risk, take a lot of additional mitigations, etc. But I guess what we need to do now, and would expect that also to come through the investigation, is really ramp up that level of cooperation and visibility of the options, configurability, protocols of the various different parties involved.
Would be very similar comment to Alice. If I can't comment about Manchester, but we have two other airports on our STARS license, which is Southampton and Bournemouth. We understand their intake. We are liaising with them to support, to review and support them to better understand their business continuity plan. We do that as a matter of course, for example, with hospital who connect into our network, and we're always available to advise, to provide insight into what to do, what can be done in terms of driving better business continuity. But we're looking forward to the review in progress to make sure that we learn from them and share the learning, and we're welcoming the opportunity.
Thank you. And this might be a question for Nigel, Alice or Eliane, but Thomas, you're obviously welcome to come in as well. Do you think enough is being done by Heathrow and perhaps other airports as well to learn from other critical infrastructure? So, for example, data centres which do have sort of readily available backup sources. Nigel?
I mean, clearly from our perspective, we've heard about the data centre reports in terms of the speed of switching. I was interested in terms of that rail example, in terms of the speed of switching. So I'd want to understand better as to where the opportunities lie in achieving that. Clearly, as I've said before, though, we already spent a heck of a lot of money on Heathrow. So I wouldn't be seeing this as an opportunity for Heathrow to kind of get another £1 billion on its regulated asset base.
Well, does anyone else want to comment on that?
I think it's definitely an opportunity we need to look at. I think objectively there are fora for infrastructure and so on, but this is something we should take the opportunity to learn. I think, just at the comment, you cannot compare Heathrow Airport to a data center. It is much, much more complex at the airport than a data center, which runs a fairly generic and sort of consistent operation, whereas we have thousands of different kinds of systems, including mechanical systems that have to work and so on, and that is just a more complex operation and requires, don't forget, just for Heathrow, we use as much energy as a small city all the time.
Perhaps the only, data centers might not be the only example. Sort of the chair of the National Infrastructure Commission, you might have seen recently, suggested that we should be ensuring that resilience is built into lots of, significant infrastructure by embedding national resilience standards across the board, whether that's digital or energy or transport infrastructure. I wondered if you had any thoughts on whether more government oversight might give more confidence to passengers and operators about, a level of service that they can expect. This was obviously a very rare incident that happened, but do you think something like that might be useful? Alice, I don't know if you want to come in on that one.
Yes, I mean, reflecting on your last question as well, I mean, for those that connect directly to the transmission network, we tend to have quite focused discussions on resilience and opportunities. And I think, last year, as part of the National Energy System Operator coming into government, they set up what's called OREM, the Office of Resilience and Emergency Management. And, I think there is a real opportunity there to look more holistically, especially as the uses of electricity are changing through decarbonisation agendas, etc. The lines of the lines of the industries and those using energy are blurring, and therefore there is this opportunity for far greater collaboration, visibility, full system looking at the resilience question.
Sorry, just a final bit from me. Has anyone else got a view on this, about whether this can be left entirely to the market? Or perhaps not. It's obviously, it's a private company.
I think that I know what was said there, and I would agree that it's definitely worth looking at. Absolutely.
Just, I mean, from my perspective, I do see that there is a need for clarity in terms of standards and national standards there, but I wouldn't want it to be seen as an opportunity for operators to suddenly put a lot more money into it and charge it through to users. As part of that process. For me, it's part of this should have been part of the hygiene factors of running an airport.
Many of us are realising we don't know enough about electrical engineering. Alice or Eliane, Thomas just said you can't compare Heathrow's electricity uses and needs to that of a data centre. Is he correct?
This is correct. It will be, as I say, they operate, Heathrow will be like a mini grid, and therefore they will have to, that's why they have, I believe, a private network operator supporting them to manage that network. As I say, I do not have visibility of how the network is configured. We are very clear, like for transmission, we operate to very clear standards in terms of level of resilience to our asset and substation. And I can confirm that all of our sites, which feed into 3 intake to Heathrow, are operating to well above the national standards.
Because the data centre that's very near North Hyde substation didn't go down because it had built-in resilience, and there was no what we would call a power cut there, and that I understand that's because data centres build in that higher level of resilience. Is that easy for Heathrow or an airport to compare to do, or more tricky because as Thomas said, it is a more complex system? Could you give some sort of layperson's explanation on the difference?
I mean, I think Heathrow's engineers will be much closer to the complexities of their own private network, but I think in very simple terms, this is a difference between sort of new build, single use of power, and retrofit to something that has evolved and been built over time and is over a very large space. So it's a complexity of retrofit versus a new build. Is a very distinct difference between the two cases.
It's more that it's more which generation it is as opposed to the technical difference between the two, or is it a bit of both?
Well, I think the other thing that is different is that data centers have, not to oversimplify data centers, but they have one use for their power in one compound, as opposed to, I mean, I think you referenced 400 buildings, many different systems. So I think there is a different level of complexity and diversity of the assets you're dealing with in an airport versus a data center.
What did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. But I can see how, you know, having the capacity within the airport perimeter or the resilience to always operate no matter what, like a data centre, would be incredibly expensive. But I guess falling well short of that, you could build into your systems, Thomas, to have capacity to receive flights at a much reduced level, perhaps to cater for the flights that are really close to the airport so they're not having to divert long distances, etc. That is a kind of halfway house, isn't it? So it's not about having this bare minimum service. You can operate at some reduced capacity, which meets the immediate needs, some skeleton level of activity. Is that being considered, or is that possible?
I would
understand
not,
what I mean? Perhaps just
I would not
Terminal
rule it out.
5 up and running quickly.
I would not rule it out. I think that is definitely a question we should ask in the caliber review. It's also in line with the 5-point plan that I mentioned later, that we will go into that. And are there areas where we should find sort of a halfway house, as you call it? And we will definitely engage with also our airlines on that. And I'm not going to talk about money all the time, but that comes as a cost, as was also said. Retrofitting a full, resilience would be hugely expensive. We can obviously have that discussion. We want to do what our customers want us to do, and that is what this is about. And
the failure is hugely expensive as well. But the problem is that the failure that occurred is hugely expensive as well, both to the airlines and to the many people who are on business trips, etc.
You're entirely right. And when we talk resilience, in general, will always be a balance between the level of resilience and the investment that goes into it. And that is a risk evaluation, which is not 100% science.
Sorry, I got distracted.
Bill, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wonder whether there are other airports elsewhere in the world, perhaps more modern ones, that have this greater degree of resilience.
I know one, which is Hamad Airport in the Middle East, which is a brand new airport with a very, very high level of investments. It's a much smaller airport than Heathrow, but I know of that one.
Yeah, and
but
how long has it been operating? Sorry? How long has it been operating?
Oh, I don't actually know. 8 years, 10 years.
Years, okay. And have you looked at it as to see what lessons you can learn from what I think is implicit in your comment that it's best in class?
Yes, we will do that. We have.
You haven't done so far?
No.
That would have been a good idea, wouldn't it?
Okay.
I've got some more.
All right, I'll come in after your one then. Okay.
Questions. Eliane Agard, you mentioned again the fact you can't see behind the connections. Should you be able to?
I think there it's about respecting the fact, like Alice was explaining, so you had the transmission network, a distribution network, and then you got the private network. I'm not sure if we go back to the analogy of using the house, so that it should be right for me to go to have visibility of, let's say, a property, to see what you're doing in your own house with your own wiring. I think that's
even from a national, strategically important piece of infrastructure.
I think that it's potentially.
I'm sorry, but the analogy doesn't stand up.
I think that it's about respecting role and responsibilities. I think the review, both the NISO review taking place and the Kelly review, might find that actually we should have greater visibility for asset of national infrastructure, But at the moment, it could be seen as, a company interfering into the private matter of another company. So it's about respecting this role and responsibility. But we're more than happy to work with Heathrow and the private network operator to see how we can help, we can work together to improve resilience. And actually, as we speak, through the DESNES, another group, we're currently working on and looking at that type of question.
Yeah, Nigel Wicking, I suspect you have a
Yes.
slightly different view there.
Yes, thank you. I mean, from my perspective, it's really important to understand this is a piece of key national infrastructure, and as airlines and consumers, we don't have that expertise to understand whether Heathrow saying it's resilient is resilient. And I would suggest for both power, water, fuel, etc., there possibly does need to be an independent perspective on that, an expert perspective on that resilience and whether it's adequate. And that should be shared with those who are using the airport as to whether it's adequate for them, because clearly a day to recover was not good for us.
Thank you. That's helpful. And to this point around that, Elsie Blundell mentioned actually about the role of implicitly role of the public sector. What should government and industry be doing together to mitigate the risks and effects of power outages that obviously have the potential to cause so much disruption as we've just seen?
Yeah, I think there's a big question there as to resilience. So yes, there should be hardening of assets that provide power into national infrastructure such as this, but I think the resilience is the big concern that we would have as a community, of users, and having that assurance through a body that government actually says is the right body to do that assessment is a good thing.
And do the rest of the panel have anything to add to Nigel Wicking's comments there?
So, as an industry, we practice for major events on an annual basis, but it's mainly I guess more like utilities. We had, for example, last year we had OAK project where all different type of agencies and utility company re-earth potential catastrophic situation. Potentially what we need to do is to look at involving more private network in this type of discussion. And I'm sure that, something we will review as part of the NISO review, to say when a private network like Heathrow, who is recognized to be critical to the UK, should be included in that type of rehearsal.
And Alistair Lahanty.
I mean, I would absolutely agree, and I think these are the important questions that will be asked through the reviews that are done. I don't think there's easy, obvious answers around, for example, your previous question of visibility into their network. But what is really clear here is the need to create that cooperation and the understanding of the reliance on each other and the impact of each other's actions. And, as Eliane said, there are lots of well-established industry processes within the electricity networks and the system operation for dealing to responses, but extending that further into users and their role in those exercises is likely to be a helpful extension.
Yeah.
And on that, I mean, that was point 4 of my 5-point plan that we'll put in motion, is exactly that, strengthening our collaboration with our external partners, including SSEN and National Grid. I must say that I believe that actually SSE and engineers have quite a lot of insight into our power networks. I know that cooperation has been very close both before and after this incident, but I'd like to come back to the committee to clarify that point. On the point of resilience overall, I agree that I don't think there has ever been held anything back from our airline partners as far as our resilience is concerned. They know our operation really, really well. Any investment that goes into Heathrow is prioritized by airlines, and it is approved individually and specifically by both airlines and the CAA for every single pound we invest. So there is full transparency.
Well, perhaps both SSCN
And if that has not been the case, I'll be happy to make sure that happens in the future.
Yeah, look, perhaps both SSCN and Heathrow can confirm this point about how much visibility there is, because you've contradicted each other there, I think. But I won't ask you to continue. Can I also, should the electricity infrastructure be critical national infrastructure where it is supplying such a major transport network?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't hear the first part.
Should the substations, should the supply into something as significant as Heathrow be critical national infrastructure, regarded as such?
I think that given the fact that Heathrow is critical national infrastructure, it would make good sense, and maybe the NISO report can look into that, good sense to say, so which critical supply chains are then potentially also critical national infrastructure, to make sure that there are the right level of resilience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming it's not currently at that status.
The transmission network is critical national infrastructure, yes.
Not the substations.
As far as the transmission substation, I'm unclear on whether distribution.
Or specific substations because of the importance of certain.
The three we're talking about are they critical national infrastructure?
We consider the transmission network as a whole critical national infrastructure. And we work with government on the security levels and the standards associated.
As far as you're concerned, substations are.
Yes,
right.
yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I just confirm?
Maybe to build on that.
Yeah.
There is also a delivery obligation from the power networks to Heathrow. There are various levels of priority, and we are a priority one, and that is the confirmation we got yesterday morning from SSCN that we would be prioritized. We have not had that before, and that's why we have not used the third inlet before now.
Okay, and my final questions on this section, Chair. Can you confirm that overloading of the network wasn't the cause or even a factor, and that as the grid expands with the government's Clean Power 2030 agenda, this will not be a cause for concern?
Yes, I can categorically confirm there was no overloading or overcapacity in the area. The topic you hear discussed is the long lead times to connect, because it takes time to build up capacity, and that is what you hear discussed. There is currently absolutely no question but that there is sufficient capacity in the area.
Yeah, and there's no overloading because you're under pressure to make those connections.
Absolutely not, and certainly not in the middle of the night at the time of this incident. We were well below capacity across the entire network.
Yeah.
I can confirm, we've checked, the distribution network was operating at less than 30% of its maximum capacity of Northside substation.
Okay, and likewise, you have no concerns around future grid connections and the effect
exactly as Alice expect, we operate within very rigorous standards in terms of what we can allow to connect onto the network to make sure we protect existing connectivity.
Okay, yeah, because from West London, we've known for some time that the grid capacity challenge is affecting new developments, but thank you for clarifying that it wasn't a factor in this incident. But actually, for Heathrow, given you're part of the West London development pipeline, you're increasing, you're building out at the existing Heathrow terminals, and obviously you've got plans to build a third runway and another terminal. And you're a major member of West London Business, which is the organisation which has been pushing on this issue for some time. Are you concerned that there's sufficient capacity for expansion?
The short answer is yes, we will need more power at Heathrow Airport, and we are planning for that. We will need more power for the green transition, and we'll need more power for a third runway. We have already applied for a connection to the national grid directly. That was done a few months ago, and we have paid our fees. I understand the waiting time is about 7 years, so there's a long waiting time. We will need about double the amount of energy that we have today to accommodate the projects that we talk about.
And would that having additional energy also reduce the chance of an outage such as you had the other week?
There were already in the previous, if I can call it that, third runway project, thoughts about how we could improve resilience in various areas as building out when we make these big investments, and that will naturally be the case again. Yes.
I've actually got one more question. Sorry,
Yeah, go on, Bill.
I forgot. The Joint Committee on the National Security Strategy published a report in 2022 saying that power outages have the potential to cause widespread economic and societal damage. Have any of you been looking at the work of the JCNSS? Did you, and Heathrow in particular, did you consider its findings?
I don't know exactly that report. I'm sure we would have people looking at it. We have looked at many other reports that I can quote from, but not this particular one. I don't know it. But it is true, and we have also had a report from, excuse me, that we have considered, which was the, which is a sort of similar concern that is brought up, that has been considered, and which I, by the way, agree with. There was a report from the National Infrastructure Commission 2023 raising similar concerns, and that report has been looked at, and I fully agree with that. As I said, Heathrow to expand will need double the amount of power that we have today.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the two reports are consistent. You're correct, Nigel. Is this something you've been looking at?
No, it hasn't.
Okay.
I'm participating in the security exec group at Heathrow, and that hasn't been shared at that group.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bill. Steph, you had a
just to
specific
build on that
question
point
going
about,
back to on the night.
Yeah, West London expansion and the potential need for significantly more power. I'm interested in who is going to be responsible, who is responsible now for the security at those substations. I think there's some question about exactly which part of the apparatus is critical infrastructure, which isn't, on a site-by-site basis, I guess. But whose job is it to make sure that the sites are not able to be accessed and that this sort of thing preventatively doesn't happen?
Oh, sorry, and there's the external access, but also there's been questions raised about the proximity of the two transformers to each other and the lack of a wall between them. I mean, where does the responsibility lie, and what between National Grid and SSE and key stakeholders, do they have any influence over those decisions and those policies?
Thank you. So within the substation that gets referred to as North Hyde, there's the high voltage compound and the low voltage compound. National Grid Electricity Transmission operates the high voltage and SSEN operates the low voltage. Yeah. So for the security of the high voltage compound, National Grid is responsible. We work very closely with the relevant government departments and agencies who determine the security level requirements per substation, and we rigorously deploy those. There are different categories. Of course, I'm not going to go into the details of that. That's confidential information, but we apply the standards that are provided for the rating of the substation, including North Hyde, which was secure. Then the low voltage compound is operated by the distribution network, and they will be responsible for the security of that.
And we operate to the same standards in terms of making sure our sites are kept secured throughout our network.
So in terms of the practical management of site security, I appreciate you can't go into details. I'm not privy to the details of the provision at Bacton Gas Terminal, for instance, but I'm aware that that is a site of national security and it has multiple stakeholders, including military police on patrol at all times. Yeah. It sounds like you commercially as an operator are responsible for the security. You don't get extra support from any of the law enforcement or security agencies at that site.
Again, I won't go into the details, but we do have different ratings and different provisions given the criticality of substations, and we apply them exactly as we're advised and discussed with the right departments.
Yeah. I mean, we're bordering on issues that may be questions for the Joint Committee on National Security, which I think, Bill, you sit on, but because I do want to go back now to the business continuity planning at Heathrow, if that's okay with colleagues. Catherine.
Thank you. We heard earlier that the failure of this substation, being one of three, would, in your view, always mean that there would have had to have been the closure of the full closure of Heathrow due to safety. Is that something that was acknowledged in advance? And if so, is that something that was shared with airlines in advance, that the failure of one substation would require the full closure of the airport?
It was on our risk register, as mentioned earlier. I do not believe it's a specific discussion that has been had with airlines, but it's not been a secret. It was reported to the Ministry of Transport in 2018, very specifically, that these were the issues. These were let me bring that up. That these were the systems that were backed up by individual. Yeah, so the systems I mentioned earlier, the CAA control tower, the airport telephone exchange, main fire systems, and so on, would be powered up by generators and uninterrupted power supply. And the comment is, in summary, this would give us capability to deal with immediate safety concerns, but not continue operations due to passenger disruption. So that was a known fact, and that was reported to the ministry in 2018.
And just because I can't see that in front of me, but the point that you're saying, that means a full airport closure. Yes. When you're saying
we cannot operate passengers safely, we cannot operate.
And so was it then just considered that the risk is so low that it was worth taking in that sense? Because I think obviously this was a specific fire, but I think as Mr. Wicking has raised, there will be other potential threats to substations.
Yes, and they are of course considered, and Mr. Wicking mentioned the specific example, which I'm well aware of, and we did a full security scan of all our, this is a much smaller substation we're talking about. It's not the kind that we are talking about that went on fire. And we did a full security scan together with the relevant police authorities and made sure that security for those areas live up to the standards that are there. This was a theft of copper, but of course we need to consider anything that could disrupt our operation.
Considering the range of possibilities that could take out a substation, do you think that it is appropriate for nationally critical infrastructure that risk is one that is deemed enough of a risk to take that gamble?
I think that as a customer of the power companies, we need to be able to rely on the contracts that we make. And as I said, that's true for water, that's true for fuel, that's true for many other things. That said, we of course consider all the risks that could hit the airport, irrespective of who is responsible. That is our responsibility, to look at all those risks. And that is what we have done. And that's why we had a playbook that said, how do we handle such a situation, which is highly unlikely and which shouldn't happen and which is unprecedented. And in that situation, that was the solution that we had to bring us safely back to full operation on Saturday morning.
Does that mean we're left in a situation where the risks that were taken, the planning that was put in place, is one that means that passengers and the airlines are having to pay for that risk?
In what sense, sorry?
Well, obviously, I think a lot of passengers
pay for the consequences.
Of that risk.
The balance is, and will always be, and I think that is what we should discuss in the Kelly review and in the NISA review. What is the right balance of those two concerns, which is investment cost? And as you can, Mr. Wicking said, Heathrow is a costly airport. There are many good reasons for that. It costs twice as much to construct in London as the average of the rest of Europe. So just building in London is twice as expensive, or 94% more expensive than it is for airports in the rest of Europe. So there are good reasons why Heathrow is more expensive. But our job is, of course, to try to balance those together with our airlines. And I don't think any of these resilience issues have been kept a secret to airlines, to make sure that we operate the correctly risk-balanced airport, taking into consideration the resilience, the likelihood of an event, and the cost of the resilience.
Scott, did you have a quick supplementary on something Thomas just said?
Yeah, just as an aside, you mentioned that you wrote to the Ministry of Transport in 2000. You mentioned that you wrote to the Ministry of Transport in 2018 around the nature of the power connection to the airport. Did you receive or expect a response to that?
I don't think there was a response to this. This was a questionnaire that was sent out by the ministry and responded to that.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
Chair was hoping to come in.
Oh, sorry, Nigel.
Sorry, I just wanted to come back on that sharing of information. As I mentioned earlier, I raised the risk with Heathrow myself off the back of other events and recognising the potential impact. In terms of cost, this has cost the airlines 60 to 100 million pounds. It's difficult to actually quantify yet, but it's cost a lot. And Heathrow, in its conditions of use, absolves itself of any liability. If there were death or injury, that doesn't occur, but for any operational failure that Heathrow has, they completely absolve themselves of liability in the conditions of use. The airlines refute that every year in the conditions of use publishing, but by flying into Heathrow, you accept the conditions of use. No one signs it, but by flying into Heathrow, you accept it. So you have to accept the clause of no liability to Heathrow. So firstly, unacceptable that hadn't been shared with us in terms of the detail of what risk appetite they had to take on substations. And secondly, we suffered all the cost out of this, and clearly the passengers in particular did.
So just for absolute clarity, is your view that you weren't aware and the airlines weren't aware that the failure of a substation would have meant the closure of Heathrow?
No.
Thank you.
On that point, I would obviously like to come back to the committee. I've been in position for a little more than a year, but I don't see any reason why this information should not be shared. I would also like to say the substation that is mentioned is very, very different from the substation that we are talking about here. That was in question earlier. That's a much smaller substation. It's a Heathrow substation, and it is secured in the way it should be.
Okay, can I just establish the conditions of use that you talked about, Nigel,
Yes.
which in itself I think is worth further questions, but we probably don't have time today. Can I just understand, are those conditions of use arrangements unique to Heathrow or unique to UK airports?
Unique to Heathrow, they are Heathrow's conditions of use that are laid out for airlines using Heathrow. It would include the charges, it would also include operating parameters, etc.
And liability for costs when things go wrong.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Steph.
Can I make a comment on that?
Yeah, go on.
It's of course Heathrow's conditions of use. They are in line with all other airports in Europe. I had this specific discussion with the CEO of Virgin and the CEO of BA a couple of days ago, and they accept that the conditions of use at Heathrow are in line with the conditions of use of most of the big airports in Europe, including Copenhagen, where I was previously. So this is standard terms of use. I know that airlines, of course, do not like the way it is, but this is the way it is in most of Europe.
I just find it incredible that an airport can absolve itself of any liability whatsoever.
But is Thomas correct that they're similar to other European airports?
That evidence, but that may be the case.
Okay,
It doesn't mean it's right.
Something to probe. Okay, Steph.
Thank you. I think we all appreciate the elucidation you've given, Thomas in particular, as to the approach to risk management. I think we accept that risk management is about balancing convenience, cost and risk and safety. And I think I wanted to put on record the fact that we're having this type of discussion clearly has relied upon the operational excellence of a number of players, including those represented today, and the response to the events themselves, which I also appreciate the detail to which you've gone into. I do appreciate, Thomas, that you're a business, you've got commercial confidentiality, duty to shareholders, etc. I'm keen to understand a bit more about how the balance sheet reflects the approach to risk management. How much is spent each year, not on the fun stuff that brings in more passengers, but on the boring stuff, the maintenance side of things. And just to sort of draw people's attention, we around a report by a consultancy firm called Jacobs in 2014, which did connect the potential for power outage, even briefly, to have very significant effects across the entire airport. And I know that you said that in your knowledge, there hasn't been a board discussion specifically to turn down an investment proposal for something like an on-site ring main since then. But can you still give us a ballpark figure of how much is spent on the sort of boring maintenance stuff each year, and what's been done since that Jacobs report specifically around
with
this
with the caveat of defining what is the boring stuff?
Yeah.
We are currently investing about 1 to 1.1 billion pounds a year.
Yeah.
At least half of that about goes into maintenance improvement of the current airport. So you can say we're looking at least £500 million currently going into what you describe as the more boring stuff.
So the £1 billion on sort of on-site ring main thing, that's sort of it's a large, very large investment, but it's not sort of logarithmically out of step with what you're spending, for example, in a typical year on this sort of thing.
No.
And have you done anything else in particular and invested specifically in any other areas to mitigate that risk of essentially total airport shutdown? Let's accept that for a moment. That was a known risk since that 2014 report that you're aware of.
I'm aware of the fact that we invested now in our power resilience during that period. I can't give you an amount. I think the Jacobs report were there to address other issues, not specifically something like this, but nonetheless, yes, we have. As I said, building T5 more. There are four lines going instead of 2 going into T5 because that's a possibility. So more has been done, yes. If you like specifics on that, I'd like to come back to you on that.
That would be very helpful. Thank you. And can I just add a supplementary to my own question, if I may, to Alice, I think, and probably also to Elaine. Like, you've got a service level arrangement, you've got resilience, which unfortunately failed in this instance because of the unique nature of this fire and the consequences on that one site. Like, what proportion of the amount that you're taking in revenue per year do you actually have to spend on making that infrastructure work to deliver that enhanced resilience requirement?
Yeah, so we our relationship to customers is set out in codes that set out quite deterministically the level of redundancy and resilience in the network to secure that. And as we've discussed, power did remain available in the area throughout the incident as a result of that inherent redundancy in how the system is designed. We consistently achieve 99.59s of reliability on the transmission network. We have an incentive or a mechanism called energy not supply, whereby we are penalised if we do not supply energy, and so that reduces accordingly. And we invest a huge amount in the resilience and the health of the network. So, for example, 5.2 billion on asset health over the last period, 3.7 billion of which was specifically on substations and cables. We've just submitted our next 5-year plan that includes another approximately 5 billion specifically on asset health, but a further 30 billion on increasing capacity, increasing resilience, increasing security. So that's a very significant part of our investment.
I understand that's highly regulated, and it's part of a cycle that's approved by departments and scrutinised, I think, by Bill's committee. But I'm kind of interested in what you get if you're paying for enhanced resilience at that site. There was an argument that says, I'm sure this will be brought out in the fullness of time, that site had things juxtaposed to each other in a way that was really detrimental to the reliability of that transmitter, that transformer site. Who pays for that stuff? Who does that on site? Is that a high capacity, high voltage transmission investment, or is that coming from something like the distributor?
So, I mean, of course, much of this will be looked through the investigation. As it's currently set out, our substations, I mean, the substation was designed and built quite some time ago to standards that are set out, and we work to that. As I briefly described earlier, where customers want to connect directly to the transmission network and they want very substantially increased levels of resilience beyond the industry codes, they can request and discuss that. So you do get certain customers who will come to us and say, I want 3 independent, totally independent feeds, et cetera, and those investments get worked up, costed, proposals made and worked through.
And Elaine, the same question to you. Like,
Yep.
Thomas is paying you 135 million quid a year. Some of that's for juice, but some of that's also for the stuff you've got to do to keep the lights on. How does that work? How much are you spending in that sort of area?
It's important to set the context. So as a DNO, we connect to the transmission network via grid supply points, where there are super grid transformers, which convert 400 kV, 275 kV to 132 and 66 kV. In this instance, because the 3 super grid transformer failed at that grid supply point, we, as a DNO, lost access to power at that point.
Okay.
What we were able to do, as I said, is because we had interconnector between the Ivor grid supply point and the Northside grid supply point, by 9:30 a.m., when we were able to energize, we were able to create a new connection and able, therefore, by 10 a.m. to offer power to Heathrow. I think that it's also important to reconfirm that we're very transparent with businesses who connect on our network, that a firm connection is not a guaranteed of supply of electricity, but rather it's a connection which has which has double circuit rather than one single circuit. And that for that reason, that, for example, data centers or the like of Network Rail would have alternative business continuity plan to be able to maintain continuity of supply. So, and also important to stress that for our own network, we operate to very clear standards in terms of the level of resilience we have to offer and to maintain. And to answer the next question you were asking, we spent 2 billion over the five-year control period between 2023 and 2028 to maintain that level of resilience, but also upgrade our network to be able to meet net zero.
None of that money was spent at that transmission side.
So, as I said, that grid supply point is owned by National Grid. What our asset was the interconnector to connect the 2 grid supply points, and it was available as soon as the fire brigade gave us the green light to energize.
Yeah, and Alice, none of that national infrastructure investment was specifically spent at this transmission site.
I have not checked how much was spent at North Hyde. I mean, all sites are in a continuous maintenance, inspection, investment cycle. So I would have to come back with the specifics of investment on North Hyde.
Lawrence, did you want to come in at this point?
Quickly, thank you, Chair. I wanted to return to contingency planning, and my colleague referenced the 2014 Jacobs report, which set out some generalised warnings about the risk of electricity outages. Down the years of contingency planning at Heathrow, was this specific scenario with a complete failure of the North Hyde site identified as a risk? And if so, on the night of the 20th and the 21st, was a contingency plan that was prepared for that eventuality followed?
Yes, to both questions. We have a plan for a total failure of power at Heathrow. We have a plan for part failure like the one we saw, and the plan was executed the way that it was laid out. And excuse me, I think just to also to comment, sorry about that, comments made earlier. There you go. That at 0200, so the decision was not taken that long. The airport chief engineer uses prepared resilience plan to begin reconfiguring of the supply to Terminal 2 and Terminal 4. This is likely to take 12 hours in total.
Just tease out the fine difference. you said the contingency plan was prepared for complete loss of power.
Both.
Is that the same as a contingency plan being in place specifically for the complete failure of this substation?
There are two different plans, one for complete failure and one for a part failure, part loss, as in this case. And that's the one that was put in motion.
Okay, I am keen to get on to the impact of on passengers and airlines, but just very briefly, Scott, you've got just a couple of questions.
Yes, so very quickly, obviously we've got the two official inquiries, one from NISO and one from CAA. Do you think these are enough to get to the bottom of what happened and what lessons we can learn?
I mean, just to add to that, we also there are also investigations underway by the fire services. So I think between that combination of investigation into cause and then the NISO's review into this wider resilience impact, because as we've discussed, the cause is one topic, the full scale of the impact is another. I think we should be in a good position, and the CAA doing their work to understand the full set of opportunities to learn from this event, yes.
Welcome the CAA investigation and report. Clearly we'll want to participate with that and engage with it and understand also what it will cover in its breadth. But yes, certainly welcome it.
And Thomas, you have your own inquiry, and this is, as you've referred to repeatedly, as a Kelly review. Will that be published in the public domain?
We have published terms of reference, and I would definitely think that conclusions would be definitely shared with the Department of Transport and also with this committee.
Not in the public domain.
That depends on, there could be safety and security concerns in there, and that's a matter for the board to approve. But I would definitely think that that conclusions would be shared in one way or the other. Yes.
And you know, and if these reports show that either you're poorly planned or the airport dealt with the situation poorly, will you reconsider this issue around compensation to the airlines and also passengers and your many stakeholders on site?
I think that we should do. I have had that concrete discussion with both the CEO of Virgin and the CEO of British Airways, that we have agreed that the whole matter of compensation, we would actually like to have a discussion about when we know the facts, including why this fire started. We are almost 2 weeks in and we still don't know why we had a fire. So that was the agreement we made.
Okay, good.
Okay, just very quickly, Catherine.
Yes, I mean, you've talked about other European airports, but there was a 2023 report to the United States Congress by the Government Accountability Office, which references a large hub airport there that has more than one substation, and that they have the ability to switch from one substation to the other if either of the substations lose power. When you talked about it costing £1 billion, is that the kind of thing, that investment, that would give us?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
I should say that £1 billion is a very sort of broad stroke in terms of numbers, right? But we're not talking about £100 million, right? Yeah. It is a very, very big investment.
But that investment would mean
that is the kind of thing.
If either failed, if any of the three failed, you could just switch to another.
What you do? Yeah, what you do is you build a ring, and every building and system and machinery takes power from that ring, and then you build the power supplies into that ring, so they, you know, the ring doesn't go down, and then you actually have the supply. That's the principle that you would have.
So other airports elsewhere in the world are able to do it, but it's prohibitive for you.
Again?
It would be prohibitive for you to do it where other airports have been able to do it. Is that your? I
don't see it as being prohibitive. I see it as being highly costly, because we have an infrastructure that is built over 70 years. It's been built in parts and put together in parts. Yeah. Resilience, as you know, has been considered many times, and we have discussed resilience.
You've told us that. So your point is it would just be too difficult. It would be that much more difficult for you.
Yes, it's a retrofit, and of course it's a discussion we'd have to have with airlines, because
and in a answer to a similar question earlier to me, you said you weren't aware of whether the board had considered that spending decision in the past. And you're going to come back to us on whether the board has at any time considered but turned down that decision, I think you said.
I don't think that decision has been turned down, but I would like to clarify the facts when I cannot.
We'll look forward to hearing from you. Right, I do now want to get on to passengers and airlines. Alex.
Thank you. How effectively did Heathrow work with other airports in the UK, continental Europe, and the rest of the world during the incident to accommodate diverted flights and to reroute passengers?
The air traffic control services are handled by NATS, who's responsible for managing the UK airspace, and their standard protocols were used. It is a matter directly between the airspace management and airlines and other airports to facilitate that. We do not have visibility of where aircraft are exactly. It is clearly airlines wish to manage their own aircraft. So there's not a sort of a process where we coordinate with other airports, because that is the prerogative of airlines to do that. It's their aircraft, and they're not asking us to do it either. Whether a process like that could be replaced, I wouldn't rule out, but I think the most efficient is for NATS to do that via their control center, because they know where the aircraft are and they know where the airlines want them. And we, of course, kept coordination with NATS throughout the process and the event.
Yes, so from an airline perspective, the various ops controls of the airlines would have coordinated what to do with those that were already on their way, the 120. As I mentioned a bit earlier, some of them would have gone back to their point of origin. Others would have been diverted, having consulted with NATS as to whether there might be airport capacity within the UK, and then allowing faster access then to London. There were only about 11 spaces available, and on the 7 o'clock call, those were all taken. So that's where airlines were then having to put their aircraft into other European airports and stations, sometimes a bit further afield, such as Newfoundland and various other locations, unfortunately.
And to the extent that you know the answer to this one, when do you think that other airports became aware that flights would be heading in their direction?
I couldn't tell you exactly, but the ops controls, as soon as they were aware of the situation and the fact that Heathrow was closed, would have been, and that would have been informed via what's called a NOTAM. They would have then been out there trying to find where to put their aircraft. And of course, at that point, they're seeking more information from Heathrow as to how long the closure might be, etc.
Thomas Wilbright, the decision to close until midnight, do you think that was taken quickly at an early stage?
Yes, it was. The NOTAM, I should have it here, the NOTAM went out, I believe at 1:40 something in the morning, sorry.
44.
Yes.
Yeah. And why? And why did you make the decision at that stage to say it was all the way up until midnight?
Because we would not be safely able to operate the airport, as already discussed, safely operate the airport at opening. We had no visibility on when we would be able to operate the airport, and our accountable officer, who is the one in charge of taking safety decisions like that, clearly had very little visibility. We still had a blaze going on. We didn't know exactly how long it would take us and what the consequences would be of the shift over that we talked about. And hence, we need to give airlines information that they can actually operate on. We have previously seen scenarios where we say, well, we maybe think we're open by so, and then we are not, and then it rolls on, and actually the consequences are much worse than being able to take a decision. Now, as also said, and what was shared with airlines very early in the morning, is that our objective was, one, to be back in operation next morning, but also that we would do whatever we could to be in operation faster.
And now just thinking about all the other forms of public transport that normally access the airport, so trains, tube, buses, coaches, what were your conversations with them over the whole period?
There are coordination calls with London where all of these entities participate, and so do we, and we kept them regularly updated. I can't remember the sequence, but every 3 hours maybe, so that the entire system, and there you have Department of Transport, everybody is participating. The communication was efficient in the way that we saw very, very few passengers turning up at Heathrow before the ones that were supposed to turn up actually turned up.
Okay. Scott.
Thank you, Chair. So Nigel, Willie Walsh from the International Air Travel Association, who's normally quite a quiet and unassuming character, said this was yet another case of Heathrow letting down travellers and airlines, and it was a clear planning failure. And I think you've already said you think there's a planning failure here, but what Willie's saying there is this is yet another case of a problem at Heathrow Airport. Is it a problematic airport?
Well, yes, I mean, from our perspective, and we've got to look at this with regard to future growth and expansion, investment, etc. We're not sure about the foundations of Heathrow as it stands at the moment. There have been a series of events such as this, and
give an example. Sorry.
Well, we've had outages during last year where we had 82 baggage system issues through the whole of last year, and thousands of bags misconnecting. And from a point of view of value, as I said before, this is the most expensive airport in the world for passenger charges, and the reality is that we don't get good value for money as airline users and as consumers, and we need to have better surety of that value and the value potential in terms of efficient investment, efficient services, etc. As we move towards expansion, airlines are very supportive of expansion, but it can't be under the existing regulatory framework and model because it's just not delivering the efficiency and value that we would expect. And this
when you mean regulation, you mean the way Heathrow is regulated by the government, you think?
So Heathrow is regulated by the CAA, and there is basically a 5-year cycle of that regulation. Clearly, there are expansion proposals being tabled, hopefully later this year, and there's some big numbers associated with that, very big numbers, into the kind of 40 to 60 billion. We cannot go in that direction without a fundamental review of the economic model of Heathrow, because at the moment the charges today are about £25 per passenger. That's £50 per passenger for a long haul flight. We think with rates and the business rates that could increase by another £5 to £6 in 2026. So there you're straight into kind of £30 plus. And then the next regulatory cycle, it could be another £5 to £10. The numbers are going in the wrong direction already. If we then add on 40 to 60 billion onto the regulated asset base, it just won't be affordable, and we'll have a white elephant, frankly. So yeah, Willie's comment is absolutely right. We need to get a grip of this situation with Heathrow, and we need to have an airport that we can all be proud of and that really delivers great value to the economy.
So Thomas, you've been in the job for a year or so, you explained, and I guess you've come to terms with operation now. Is what Nigel's saying a fair assessment, or has he been a little bit harsh on you?
I think we need to understand the context that Heathrow operates in. Heathrow is one, in terms of space, the smallest airport of hubs in Europe. Just an interesting KPI, we operate 6.5 passengers per square meter of airport. The closest to that is Frankfurt at 2.7, Amsterdam at 2.5.
Does that excuse all these problems around baggage handling and all the rest of it that Nigel was
what I'm making clear is that Heathrow is a highly utilized, very dense, very utilized, the most efficient airport in Europe in terms of runways, in terms of square meters. So
you want to make it denser with this expansion, don't you?
Sorry?
You want to make it even denser?
No, we'll get it less dense by expansion, because that will give us more space.
Okay.
So what you can say is that we are operating at capacity. which for any operational system is not a healthy situation to be in. But that is where we already are. So,
excuse me, but you're choosing to operate at capacity. You could
we
operate
do
at
that.
95% capacity.
We do that, yes, but our airlines would like that because that would reduce the number of passengers, which is what we all live from. So that we are under pressure all the time to accommodate more passengers in our system and more flights in our system. We operate the number of flights to basically 100%, and passengers, we do as much for our airlines to accommodate as many passengers as possible. Don't forget, on that point, we're totally aligned as airport as passengers. Now, if we were to reduce, and there's previously been talk about that, to reduce capacity, there would be an uproar from airlines, and that's also what happened, for example, during COVID. So we are all aligned that we want as many passengers as possible. You can say the short answer is that we should have expanded Heathrow many years ago. That is, I think, the short answer. We are operating at a very, very, very high level of efficiency, and of course we're working with the airlines to make that and to make that an experience that is as efficient for the airlines as possible and as pleasant for the passengers as possible. Now, since I came, I put in place a strategy that specifically talks about value for money, that we want our airlines to perceive better value for money. Are there ways we can do that? I hope so. But as I said, expanding Heathrow, if we want that additional value for the society, getting another runway is really the only solution, because at the current time, we're running at basically 100%. And as you know, when you run a system at 100%, you wear it down faster, and your likelihood of getting failures is bigger, and we are working every day with our airlines to minimize that.
Right. So just to close off one last point as well, and I think it's been touched on earlier, is around the communication with airlines during this event. And so some of them have said that you're quite slow to respond, and the airport wasn't good at keeping up with the data update. And Nigel did give that example of a Teams call with 1,000 people on it, which sounds horrendous, but I guess you were in uncharted territory. Is there lessons that can be learned through how you communicate? And do you acknowledge some of those concerns about how airlines didn't always feel they're in the loop?
Points. I have received personally only very positive feedback for our communication. All our airlines, some of them have written to us and said the communication that was given to airlines during the incident was first class. And that is these calls. It is correct. During one call, we maxed out more than 1,000 people. We have rectified that already. That will not happen again. So that is the feedback we received. If there's concrete examples on how we can improve that, of course we'll take those in, and we'll invite that from airlines. And it's part of the 5-point plan that I presented. That specifically, we will talk about with airlines. Is there immediate learnings from this that we can put into action? Absolutely.
You want to come back on that very briefly, Nigel?
Yes, thank you. Clearly, airlines have a duty to communicate to their customers and tell them what's going on. They set up their call centres and other infrastructure to make sure that they kept in touch with the consumers. One of the things that is really important there is not to just have the community calls, is actually to have structured information on a reasonable kind of document on a regular basis, just to update those communication teams as to where things are at. Because in the end, the airlines are basically taking care of the customers. And unfortunately, this was a Friday, so there have been a lot of families seeking to travel for kind of quick trips over to Europe, over to the UK, whatever, and those would have ended up as cancellations. They might rebook, or they might have just actually asked for a refund. So lots of money lost from that perspective, being a Friday coming towards Easter.
We're coming on to that. When was the Department for Transport notified?
I think 3:30 in the morning.
3:30 in the morning.
Yes, and we kept continuous updates. I spoke to the Director General at Department for Transport and the CEO of CAA several times during the day.
Okay. Baggy, did you just want to pin down some more detail on
around lessons into covering? Can I just start by saying I visited Heathrow last week, and for an untrained eye, I was really impressed on. I visited Heathrow last week, and for an untrained eye, I was pretty impressed on how everybody, the airport, the operators, baggage handlers, border security, everybody was working, and it looked normal to me. So I think there's general agreement that within a day or so, everything was back to normal. But just teasing out the points Scott was making around lessons learned, is there a collective approach to assessing what lessons can be learned, logging those, but doing that together rather than everyone doing it individually?
I think, if I may start, that is exactly what is in the 5-point plan that I presented and that I have put in place, is that we will work harder with our airlines, with our partners that are sitting left to me here, and engage with our customers, including passengers, and say, how can we bring that together? And I think definitely, if anything, we learn from this, the airport has a very strong ecosystem. As you said, we are back, but we will indeed learn from this experience and bring that out to the wider airport community for anything we can do to improve the experience for passengers. Absolutely.
And, I mean, there are other lessons to learn. I mean, Gatwick Airport Southern Terminal was closed and for security reasons, but they moved all their operations over to the Northern Terminal quite quickly. Nigel.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity for the airlines to share more about their command and control structures and the frameworks they use. They are very mature and very well versed in these kind of events around the world. So I think there's opportunity for us to share more with Heathrow in that perspective.
Okay. Lawrence.
You may feel that this question has been partly answered already, and I'm conscious of time, so please don't feel the need to repeat anything that's already been said. But with the benefit of now some hindsight, how well do you think that Heathrow and the airlines communicated with passengers and adapted to their individual needs during this period of disruption?
In the end, it's the airlines that are doing the communication. Unfortunately, Heathrow doesn't really have a role in that. Other than clearly comms were going out across London, which I think was good to make sure that people knew not to come to the airport whilst it was quite closed. The airlines then provide a lot of information out to their customers, and yes, fairly sophisticated structures on that, both in terms of use of phones, etc., but also command and control structures and call centres to back up any queries.
Just to check, you said unfortunately Heathrow doesn't have a role. Do you think that there's a change to be made there?
I think there's something to be investigated there as to whether Heathrow should be more consumer and customer aware in that sense. I mean, there's often conversations that it's Heathrow's customers and there's the airline's customers. But in the end, the travelling public, and we need to make sure that all the appropriate parties are communicating with that community, and they're well informed as to where things are going to be.
Would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I think, first of all, I like to look at the outcome. Was communication effective? Very few passengers came to the airport when they shouldn't. The passengers who should come came as they should. And on the following day, passengers turned up as they were supposed to. So I think the outcome was the right one. We can always look for improvements, but we do not have the names. Don't forget, we don't have the names of passengers. Airlines have that. So, and I don't think airlines would want us to get involved in the communication with passengers. To be honest, they do that. So we communicate to the airlines, and airlines decide what to communicate to passengers. We, of course, then to the general public issues press releases. I think that worked really well. We have statements on our website, we have statements on our app, and we tweet and so on. And I would say when we look back at that particular part of the process, that worked really quite well. Yes.
But just coming back on that, that's why structured information is really important, because if you're an ops control member of staff in Malaysia and you're trying to figure out, right, what is it we need to be telling our customers in terms of their flights today, you need to have that structure rather than just a deluge of information that might come on a community call. Need specifics.
Two more questions on compensation for passengers. The first is that while some people will be reimbursed for cancelled journeys, most passengers will not be entitled to compensation. It's not inviting comments on what the regulations say, but do you think that that status quo is fair for passengers?
I think in a circumstance where it's completely out of the control of the airlines will make sure that the individual has food, drink, where necessary, accommodation, and they're also then obliged to make sure that they are either refunded or rebooked. And that's what was provided in this particular occasion. I don't think it's fair on the airlines to then pick up on compensation for a situation they didn't cause, and all that's clearly an issue with regard to acts of God, and in this case it was a supplier that had failed. So yeah, that's the perspective.
Are you done with your questions?
The second part was on that issue, which has just been touched on, which is on delay attribution.
Yes.
There are other parts of the transport sector, I'm thinking particularly about the railways, where delay attribution is perhaps better understood. Do you think that there is a need for change in that area?
I think there's opportunity to have that considered within the CAA review. Certainly with regard to this circumstance, it's very clear that it's the supply of the airport provision that's failed. It does take me back to the issue of who's liable in that kind of situation. And from our perspective, the liability sits with the airport and their suppliers.
And on that, is Heathrow going to seek compensation from the suppliers?
I think there we're back to knowing what actually happened. When we know what actually happened, we will have a position on that.
Okay, can I come back to something that Nigel raised earlier, and that's the high charges that airlines are paying. Do you think that the CAA's economic regulation powers of Heathrow and other airports, do you think the infrastructure failures at Heathrow are a product of the form of regulation that we have?
Partially, yes. From our perspective, Chair, the concern we have is the current regulatory framework incentivizes to get as much money onto regulated asset base, which obviously we can share kind of detail of what that means at a later stage. But in doing so, Heathrow often, the term is used, gold plates projects, capital projects, but doesn't necessarily deliver great outcomes. So we've got a series of situations at the moment on the horizon, let alone expansion. Terminal 4 car park is about to be condemned and knocked down, and that's going to be a big price tag potentially on it. I don't know how that's going to impact the operators that are in T4 at the moment. And, that's a consequence of possibly bad infrastructure being developed some time ago, but there might be examples of that in more recent times as well. Now, Mr. Wardby mentioned earlier that airlines sign off all the capital spend. We have to agree to a lot of the capital spend on the basis that we don't have detailed knowledge as to challenge. Two examples, though, where we have pushed back. On T2 baggage, there's a big baggage system going in, £1 billion. We've asked for experts to be there representing us independently. That's the first time we've got it, and that should become a common practice now going forward. And then on another project recently, it's got to be a big spend of about 250 million, and suddenly that was halved when I'd been pushing back to understand exactly what was that 250 million going to be spent on. So there's a lot behind this where we need to have far greater transparency and detail about capital spend, and the regulator needs to help us get to a structure and framework by which we can get to a far greater efficiency in that spend.
Excellent, thank you. There are other questions we wanted to ask, but we really haven't got.
May I make a comment to this?
Okay, very briefly.
I'd like to make it quite clear, we live up to the regulation as it is set out with CAA. When investments are planned, which is on a 5-year cycle at Heathrow, airlines are part of the prioritization. They have access to all the details. Every single project that is started at Heathrow goes through a number of gates. Airlines approve at gate 1 and gate 3 as well.
I was actually asking about the regulatory
Yeah.
system more rather than the detail of how it
No,
works.
just to say, and we are also under, and that's part of the new regulation, we are under delivery obligations, which means that if we don't deliver what has been agreed with airlines, then we get a penalty. So just to be clear, there is full transparency on investments at Heathrow, and airlines have at various stages ability to either correct, stop, or ask questions to investments at Heathrow.
Okay, thank you. I do apologise for cutting people short, but we do have to close now. Could I just say that I note Heathrow Airport Limited's commitment to the 5-point plan, and that's now on the public record. We do ask that the plan be provided to the committee in writing. Also, timescales by which you will update the committee on the implementation of the plan. Obviously, we all are looking forward to the NESO and the Kelly reports. We're keen that the Kelly report is as much as national security allows in the public domain, because there's an element, as people have said, is I hugely respect Ruth Kelly as a former transport secretary, but she is a board member at Heathrow, so we don't want it to look like Heathrow is marking their own homework. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank all of you for your evidence today. Do feel free to write to us with anything that you felt you've not been able to cover adequately. I think we've all found this session really valuable, as have, I assume, many people watching it live. That concludes today's meeting. Order.